This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone. This is My Taste is Better Than Yours. It's Samu speaking, and I'm joined here by Enzo. We're going to be discussing another series. This time we're doing what we do sometimes, which is visiting a complete series that has already been over quite some time that we both were keeping up with and that we both really enjoy. We did that recently with Goodnight Punpun, and this time we're doing it with Wandering Sun. Enzo, am I right in
Mm.
thinking that we have a similar experience in how we discovered the series and how we followed it, which for me was 2011 anime, and then
Mm.
immediately after that reading the manga until it completed in 2013.
Yep,
Is that your journey as well?
that's me. So basically, when the anime premiered, I was just actually really had just started the blog not that long before, and I knew of the manga but didn't know much about it. And the first episode of the anime to this day is one of my favorite first episodes of any anime I've ever seen. It just absolutely staggered me. It blew me away. Uh, and Especially the one in particular scene with Claire de Lune and the bridge, and
The purple
it was just,
trees.
yeah, it was just so beautiful. And then I logged, I started reading on Anime Suki in places, and the manga fans were beside themselves with anger because they skipped the whole the whole arc that came before that. And I was like,
We'll
okay,
talk about that.
okay, we'll talk about that. But yes, that was my journey, and I fell in love with the anime. I loved the anime, most of it. And then when it was over, I was like, okay, I need to know the full story now, and started reading the manga. And in fact, it was the joint first manga I ever covered on LIA. There were two that were I haven't covered a shit ton of manga over the years, but I have covered quite a few. And as far as like serialization covering chapters, it was this one and Otoyome Gitari, a Bride Story. Those were the first two manga that I ever covered in on an ongoing basis. And I still sort of do cover Bride Story, although the chapters are so irregular that I tend to even miss it when they do come out, and I'm not blogging it for months at a time. But yeah, so I have a long history. So I covered the last 30 or so chapters of the manga, the part that took place after the anime ended, and right up till the very end. And in fact, had a lot of thoughts about the manga when I wrote my final impressions that I'm sure we'll be sharing with you today, is because I still feel them very strongly even all these years later. It's a series I do feel very strongly about.
Yeah, likewise. Similar to Goodnight Punpun, I dipped my toe back into the series, even though m- my feelings were already established and haven't changed throughout the years. So yeah, that was fun in of itself, and to get back into the headspace that I was in 10 or so years ago when I was reading the series to completion, and to give like a hint of final scores. We both love this series, both the anime and the manga. Like you say, I was blown away by the first episode. I really enjoy the anime adaptation as well. Both of the anime and the manga reach in the top 20 for me on both
Mm,
of those
I
lists. Even though they're quite different and
mm, mm.
uh, in various ways, but I think they're both just successful tellings of the story. And with that, let me just read out the details for anyone who's not as familiar. So the Japanese name is Hourou Musuko, translated as Wandering Sun. It's by Takako Shimura, an author I quite enjoy a lot. That we'll discuss some specifics about her as well. It was published between 2002, so quite a while ago, and as I said, it finished in 2013 after the anime came out. And it's a seinen series that published in the magazine Comic Beam. And to give a brief synopsis, it is the story following this young trans girl named Shuichi Nitoro, who we see developing this close friendship with another classmate, another a character by Yoshino Tatsuki who is a trans boy, and the series follows them throughout elementary school, junior high, high school, explores things to do with understanding their own gender identity in the ways that they can with the limited information they have, but also going by their feelings and what feels authentic to them, exploring what they go through in the onset of puberty. We see all these aspects of gender dysphoria and all the social pressures as well that come from being transgender. Yeah, I think it is a series that has a mindful of topics, but I do think the presentation of it, both in the anime and in the manga, which is down to Takako Shimura's pen, is it has a softness to it and it's almost
Mm,
casual and slice of life in a
mm,
way that I think I appreciate, because this does occasionally get heavy, does occasionally get dramatic, but it never weighs it down too much. Which I think I really enjoy that dynamic that it has in the way that the art presents itself. I have seen people who critique it because they want it maybe to go deeper. Um,
mm.
but I personally, I really love Takako Shimura's artwork. Call it
Oh, me
plain,
too.
call it whatever you want. Vanilla is a flavor in of itself, and vanilla is enjoyable. You know,
Yeah.
you can see her artwork, and maybe it might isn't the most detailed if you compare it to any
Well,
other big names that go all out on these spreads. But I think her
yeah,
paneling and the character designs. I mean,
yeah,
I think you know as well. She does character designs for so many anime now as well, and
yeah, yeah.
she's a
I
great
was gonna
artist.
say, I was gonna say she did recently for Overtake, an auto racing anime of all things, and I absolutely love the character designs for that. I just want to say in defense of the anime before we move off that topic, and not defense of it because you love it too, but I do think that the anime succeeds in part on its own terms too, because it does a beautiful job with the color design that they chose for the anime, which is sort of a soft pastel watercolor look to it, almost
Yeah,
like a French impressionist color design, which totally complements the material perfectly, and also made, I think, an absolutely brilliant decision in casting actual children as Yoshino and Shuichi, the two leads. Cast a young boy and a young girl about 14 years old to play those two roles, which is extremely rare in television anime. You almost never see it because it's more expensive because of labor laws and everything else. And I think that added a great sense of authenticity to what was happening. So I think the anime made choices in its own right that really totally worked. And if I'm not mistaken, it's I haven't checked this in a long time. I think Okada Mari actually did the adaptation, wrote the adaptation for the TV show.
yeah. I
I would
believe
have
she
to double
might have
check
done the
that.
series composition, or she might have
Yeah. I think
some
she
behind the
did, and
scenes. Yes.
yeah. So, but I just feel like not only is this a great series, but it's also an important series. And I love all the series which I consider great series. Of course, they're great series. I love them, but I don't think they're all important in a historical context. And I do think that Wandering Sun is important in a historical context. I think it's groundbreaking, and and I also think, like you, it would be in my top 20 for sure as a manga. I think I would rank it probably similarly to Punpun, kind of just outside my top 10 is kind of where I have it, but very highly ranked. And no spoiler, the scores when we get to the end are going to reflect. I think that we're both pretty close to the same page on this, that we both really love the series.
Mm. I mean, before we get into the topic of why it is important, let's stick with the anime for a moment. So,
Mm,
you said you love the decision it makes aesthetically and also with the voice actors, which I echo that 100%. And like I said, it is different from the source material, but I think both of them, like I say, have that softness about them that lends to the story that it's telling. What do you make of the decision that the anime does, which jumps in, it misses the entire elementary school arc, jumps in at junior high, and then
right.
obviously the manga continues into high school, and it doesn't get to that point either. Um,
Yeah.
you, it's. I'm sure you've been on different sides of this as well when you've been blogging
Mm,
things where
mm.
if you've been a manga reader of something and an adaptation has done something different and you've been pissed off about it, or you are not familiar with the source material and you're enjoying the anime, but then you've got people telling you, but wait, it's bad because it's doing this thing. What comes to mind for me recently? It's not a manga. In fact, it's definitely not a manga. It's a very very old source material. I think of the Heike story, Heike
Don't
Monogatari.
go there. Don't go there.
I'm going to go there because guess what? That is also a series that's in my top 20 anime of all time. That
Yeah.
is a series where I read your
Oi.
reviews after I watched it, and
Oi.
my knowledge of the source material is so limited that what I was presented as an anime floored me. Like I was so moved by it, and it just worked for me on every level. So it is
Mm.
funny when you see people who are familiar with the source material cling onto it, or just be hypercritical for legitimate reasons, if it's different from what they expect. Do you think so? Framing that back to Wandering Sun, Hourou Musuko,
Oh,
how do you
oh,
think the anime did?
you don't get to put the genie back in that bottle. You took her out. The genie's out. We're talking about it. I think there's a fundamental difference here to me, but as someone who has experience with both the source material and the adaptation in both cases, of
Though there are
I
loads
think
of other examples I'm sure you've
yes,
experienced
there
throughout.
are, but I specifically to the two you mentioned. I think the difference for me is that Hourou Musuko is fundamentally faithful to the spirit of the source material. It's just a limited portion of it. Whereas with I think that the Heike Monogatari anime is completely unfaithful to the total complete elemental core themes of the story itself, like the actual reason the story exists, is completely betrayed by the anime. So to me, it's apples and oranges. But setting that aside, I don't want to spend a whole hour talking about Heike Monogatari because we could. But what I think is this, and I
That
admit
would be on
that
my taste is better than yours.
yes, it would be, and in this case, I would be right. But um,
Um,
uh, I think here's what I know. When the first episode came out, and I was like, "Oh my god, that was a freaking masterpiece!" And then I went online and saw people ripping it to shreds. I made kind of a sarcastic comment. It's like, "Well, I'm glad that these people have told me I was wrong to enjoy it because now I know I didn't enjoy it, and I only thought I did." But here's the reality that I look at specific to the Hourou Musuko case, going back on it in hindsight. I think they knew they only had 11 episodes to play with. And I think they were faced with a hard choice. And in those days, you know, they had something called the Manabi line, which was a certain number of Blu-rays or mostly even DVDs in those days that an anime, that was how TV anime mostly made back their production money, was selling discs. And they knew that unless they did an unexpectedly large business, they were never going to get to do a second season. And also, at the time the anime was under production, the manga was not finished yet, too. So I think they went into it knowing they only had probably 11 episodes, and that was all they were ever going to have. And I think they made a decision and said, okay, we can either try to cram all of this material into 11 episodes and even then not have an ending because we don't know what the ending is, or we can choose the portion of the manga that works best in this bite size uh, bite size slot that we have to work with. And I think looking back on it, if you were to say to anybody, if you were only going to take 1/3 of Wandering Sun and adapt it into an anime and you knew it had to stand on its own, which third would you take? I think they picked the correct third. I think the middle school arc is the one that works best as a standalone story. It has the most sense
yeah,
of internal completeness. It has the most sense of an arc of a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't think it would have worked with the elementary school arc as a standalone story. Now, you could have tried to do the elementary school arc and the junior high school arc in an 11 episode series. And don't forget, this was Noitamina, and 11 episodes was the order of the day and still is often with Noitamina shows, not 12 or 13. It would have made zero sense to even try to get into the high school thing with that, still unraveling in the manga, but they could have tried to cram it all into 11 episodes. And I'm glad they didn't in hindsight, because I think then it all would have lost, it all would have suffered, because it all would have been rushed. And I think they were better off. I think it was a wise choice by Aoki A was the director, and Indito Katamari was the person who did the adapting screenplay, the series composition. I think they made a decision. And as far as I know, it must be pointed out, I've never heard Shimura complain about that choice. I've never heard her say, maybe she has and I missed it, but I've never heard her say she had a problem with the choices the anime made. Uh, and and as someone who has now read the whole manga and loves it, I don't have a problem with it either for those reasons.
That middle school section is the best part of the series of the three for me.
Yes.
It's a funny one because the elementary school section I think is actually also in some ways maybe the most important, and it's pretty fundamental in exploring these initial ideas. So it was a bold choice, but like you say, a correct choice within the limitations of the anime world of what they could do. I do think maybe in the first episode, as beautiful as it was, places the audience maybe with not as much context as you do at that point in the series with the manga, obviously. So as good as the anime is, and I do recommend it wholeheartedly, as a case with all these adaptations that we mention, you do need to read the source material to get the full story to understand what comes before and after it. Um, and this is one that I think is one that you particularly it will do you great benefit to understand the full story if you just have watched the anime and don't know anything else. But the reason why I did mention the Heike story, Heike Monogatari, which I know you don't enjoy that comparison, is that from purely from the level of in the same way you were reacting to people who watched episode one versus how you felt about it when you first watched it, to the
Yeah.
ignorant eye, um, you got enjoyment in which people who knew the source material felt otherwise, and I feel the same way with the Hickey story. Um, but yeah, I think this is also just a unique adaptation in the way that very few I feel like start in the middle of the series and cover just the middle
Yeah, I
section.
agree. Very few do. Very few. That took guts.
Yeah, definitely. But it paid off because we love it.
Yep.
So yes, anime, recommend it. Both of us wholeheartedly. Manga, we also do. To get into the manga specifically, like we touched on, I would also agree that it is an important series. I think it's important also when you consider the context of what time it was published. Even especially now, it's an inherently political topic about being transgender, gender dysphoria, how that fits into society. Um, my question for you then, Enzo, is perception of the series as it was coming out versus now versus understanding where we are in the world. Looking back 10, 12 years, this topic I feel like was less discussed openly, so there was less education and understanding of it, I would say. But in the same way that as groups of people gain more rights or visibility, you have a rise in hatred for
Mm.
that thing. Um, I would also, from my perspective, I would argue that when the series came out, people were actually more receptive than I feel like they would be if the series came out right now. I feel like if this started in, I don't know, 2020 and went on throughout this decade, I think it would be a hot button issue with anyone who reads the series, one way or the other, how you feel about it. Um, well, what's your perception when you consider the time it came out and how people would think about it now and then?
Well, it's interesting that you say that you feel like it would be less openly received now. I don't know. You might be right. I think it's important to point out that these topics were even less openly discussed in Japan than they were like in America, and I'm guessing probably Britain, and still are. But I also feel like manga was a sort of a safe space for that. I don't think any manga that directly broached this subject, gender dysphoria and all that, became such a mainstream success as this one before it. But I do think that this was a topic that was discussed in manga more than probably anywhere else in Japanese society. And I think I don't want to get into the whole thing with the Harry Potter author and what she said about all this stuff and all that. but yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from with saying it. There maybe as things become more accepted by some people, that increases the level of vitriol other people feel, and I do think there's probably some sense of truth to that. And we're in a place in Japan now where we haven't even seen marriage equality yet, and which pretty much almost every other major uh, Western democracy or first world democracy, I should say, has gotten to at this point. So now it may come under attack again in certain places, but I mean that's been reality in Europe and the States for quite a while now, and in Japan it's still not even on the table because the ruling party just absolutely won't have the conversation. So, I still think we're in a place in Japan where a lot of these things are not openly discussed.
Yeah, I
I think
mean,
more younger people want them to be discussed, and not straight, heterosexual young people don't see what the big deal is about this in Japan. They really think we should just get over it, and society should stop being hung up on it. I think that's widely true. I think you see polling that indicates that, but the politicians won't even go there. So, and you have to understand about Japan, it's a democracy, but it's a democracy that's had one party been almost universally in power for the last 70 years with only a very brief interruption, two very brief interruptions, one of them like a year. And so it's a democracy in a managed democracy sense. So if the ruling party doesn't want to have the conversation ain't going to be had. So that's kind of where Japan is with that now, and we're even talking about something as fundamental as seemingly non-controversial, where you or I are spaced in, as marriage equality. The
yeah,
things that she gets into in this series touch a lot more nerves with a lot more people than marriage equality does, I would say.
I think to go back on why I said I feel like it would be more contentious now. That is also I'm framing that from the perspective of maybe Western viewers, because like you touched on, I don't think the needle has necessarily moved as much in Japan, or if at all. So these things, I feel like it would be explored and presented and published in pretty much the exact same way. I don't think that would have changed. It would. I just when I think about it, I just think, God, I could just imagine. I'm almost grateful that the series isn't as popular or relevant today as it was 10, 12 years ago, because it would be a heated environment for it to come out, which we can discuss further in the spoiler section later on. But there is, we both love the series. I think there are people who are critical of the series who um, think maybe it's misguided, or that they want to enjoy it because they also because they enjoy the topics that it explores, but they feel like they can't, or it doesn't do what they want from it.
Yes,
Versus those who don't enjoy it because they just think it's weird and it's gross and it's not for them. I don't
right.
really care about those people.
And they're
I'm
both
not.
wrong.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Spoiler. Well, I think we'll get into that specifically in the spoiler section once
Okay.
when we can go on to what is explored in the series. But while we're still in non-spoiler, I just want to touch on Takako Shimura specifically. There are niches of these authors who explore these sorts of themes. I think Takako Shimura, we don't know much about her real life, but clearly she has an investment and an interest in these queer LGBT plus topics and exploring identity. She's published, I believe, in every demographic, maybe other than shonen. So she's
Mm.
done seinen, josei, shoujo, girls love, and boys love magazines. She's done the whole lot, and she has her quirks and she has her fetishes as an author. Like I think most of them do. Some of them are my least favorite one, which isn't too explored, thankfully, in this series, is she's very casual about teacher student relationships. That's a trope she plays with
Yes.
in her other
Yes.
series.
Yes.
As I say, Wandering Sun doesn't really go into that too much. There are, I don't think those things take away for how much I enjoy her as an author and how she presents the series. And again, the
Mm.
fact that there is someone doing I'm talking about dozens of manga that follow these topics in all different ways. So if you have read or watched Wandering Sun, I would go to her bibliography, check out anything else that you think uh, might appeal to you, because she tackles them, I think, in a similar way she does with Wandering Sun. Though on that point, maybe you to let me know if you agree with me, Enzo. I think Wandering Sun is the series we see her grow most as an author, and it is her best work. So
Absolutely.
it starts as one of her earliest series. I believe it's maybe like her fourth or fifth series that she ever did. Ended up being her longest at 15 volumes. I think comparing the elementary stuff to the high school stuff in the end, not just an evolution in art, but I think you see her becoming the series, her becoming the author that she is now through reading Wandering Sun.
Well, yeah, and I would also say, and not only do I think it's her best series, I think one of the reasons it's her best series, and she has done shonen too, by the way. She has done series that have been classified as shonen, but
Okay, well, she's
um,
done everything then.
sometimes her keenness for these fetishes of hers can be a little overbearing. And I think that would have been really out of place in Hourou Musuko. And I think it is the series in which she shows the most restraint in that area. And thank goodness she does, because I think there's a dignity to this series and the way it handles these topics that I think is really notable. And I think that would have been undermined if she had indulged herself the way she sometimes does. So I, for one, am glad she doesn't, because I think it would have lessened the impact of the material, which I think is considerable. And I think I do think it's her best series. I think it's her best series by a good margin. I have read a few of her other things, and she is, I think, a terrific artist, as you mentioned earlier, especially with her character designs. But yeah, this is her most fully realized work. I think it's the one that has the most structural integrity. It has the most emotional depth, and I think it probably is her most important work by a fair distance, I would argue.
Okay, let's before we go into spoiler section, I want to briefly touch on the elementary school stuff of the series, things that happen in the very beginning. Um, I do think this, if you have only watched the anime, it does you a great good to read this portion of the series. I think from the very beginning, you see these motifs and these explorations of Shuichi understanding about becoming a girl, what she associates with femininity, just in these simple things like getting a haircut or these hairbands and these dresses. You have this character Saori, who's a classmate, who from the offset pushes these onto Shuichi, maybe because she sees that this is something that would be good for them, but also is pushing them outside the comfort zone in order to start exploring that. And then you have Yoshino as well, who acts as this mirror to all these opposite feelings happening at the same time. I think all that stuff in the initial few volumes is very, very good. I love it. Not as much as I say like the middle school stuff. There is one part that, like you say, it was smart that they didn't adapt only this part of the series. I'm also glad that they didn't adapt it, because there's one particular scene that I don't care for, which is between two adult characters that are introduced at this point, which is Yuki and her boyfriend Shi. There is an interaction between Shi and Yoshino, which I think is the low point of the series, where he feels Yoshino up to confirm what's happening on downstairs, and that's just, I
Mm.
think that is the only time in the series where Takako Shimura goes a bit gross, and I think it sticks out to me even in my memory, because I can't remember any other part of the series where that is the case. The one I'm talking about, those characters, Yuki specifically, she's introduced as this transgender mentor almost to
Mm.
the young Shuu, uh, who doesn't have the verbiage or understanding of what it means to be transgender, to be a girl, these exploring these ideas. Yuki clearly does, and she lives that life. What do you feel of Yuki as a character, and also looking back on her, um, do you think it in any way feeds into this, I think, gross stereotype that is perpetuated, especially nowadays, of indoctrinating transness onto children. You know, she is a stranger to Shuu at
Yeah.
the beginning of the series, and I think their relationship develops in a really lovely, authentic, essential way. But do you think also there is a part of it that could be misconstrued?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that she's a character that it, people will see her as they will bring whatever preconceptions they have to the topic, to the large topic in hand, and they'll interpret her and her role in the story through that lens. That I think it's as simple as that. If you come into this with a feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong here to begin with, then you will see her as the epitome of the problem. And if you come into this thinking that the problem is a lack of understanding, then you'll see her as someone who's promoting understanding. I think that's a complete eye of the beholder situation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the only part that does come up is like that scene I mentioned with her partner, she. Other than that, I think she's a pretty essential character in the overarching series.
Oh,
Um,
agreed. Yeah.
Probably good to go into spoiler section now. Before we do, I love Shuu, I love Yoshino, I love Yuki as well. Like I mentioned,
Mm.
I think Mako is a character who gets introduced slightly later on, who goes on a nice journey as well. I have a very unlikely favorite character who is none of them.
I'm gonna
Do
laugh
you?
so hard if it turns out to be the same one as me, but you go ahead.
I I feel like it isn't. But did you want to take a guess who you think it might be?
Boy, I have no idea. When you say unlikely, it could be almost anybody. Ebina-san,
Fine. Okay.
the guy who's cross dressing and also going on marriage interviews, and struggling with what he should do with his life. The one he meets at the cafe. That's the only one that I could think of that's unlikely.
That's
But
a niche
it's not.
pick.
That's a niche pick, but I was trying to go for someone I thought was wildly niche because you're selling this pretty hard. So who is it?
Okay, my favorite character is Shinpei Doi. Actually,
Oh my
uh,
god, it's the same as mine. It's the same as
is it?
mine.
Are you serious?
No, totally, totally,
Oh
absolutely.
my god.
I
Okay.
mean, Shu is my favorite character. Shu is my favorite character, but is one of my favorite characters in any manga. But
I mean,
of all the supporting cast, it's Doi. Absolutely, is my
okay.
favorite.
I should also say, Shu, I also feel is objectively a much better written character. I think denying
Oh,
saying
sure,
otherwise would be silly. But in terms of a character who resonated with me almost from the beginning, was Doi. Okay, I want to
totally.
touch on that. I want to touch on that specifically. Then let's start the spoiler discussion because
Okay,
this goes into the uh, middle school and high school section of the story. Um, so Doi specifically, then I'll explain why I like him,
okay,
and then I want to get your take as well, because he begins as just bully in middle school and someone who picks on her for what's happening in her life and the this dynamic which just it feels off. He's not a sympathetic character essentially from the beginning. He goes on a journey, Doi that is, and the relationship and the friendship that they develop is so refreshing and strange. But I always love seeing how it was being done. The reason why I think I liked Doi specifically, this is a little bit of projection on my part. I read it as Doi in some ways had feelings for Shuichi, and there was some complications there. Now I don't know if that's necessarily what we're supposed to take away from in the end, but as I was reading the series for years and years, that was kind of what I was getting from what was happening between them and what initiated that bad
mm,
beginning for their relationship. And I think I wanted to see that sort of being represented in the character. It never really went in that direction, but I also think what we got between them was more than enough. And seeing him turn from it's a potentially dangerous trope, like trying to moralize a bully. And I think done in lesser hands can just seem it can just be off-putting, I think, in the execution. But I think it's done excellently here, even if the ending for his character is slightly different than maybe I would have imagined when I was reading it monthly. Tell me what do you think of that, and also tell me what you actually feel about Doi. Because I didn't know this. I
Well,
genuinely did not know that.
no, I didn't know either. But I just had it as soon as you started in on that unlikely main. That's what I wonder. I love Doy's character because, well, first of all, because I think the reasons you cite I agree with them, but he has an arc. He has a very definitive development, and he in many ways represents, I think, a very realistic take on what a young kid raised in Japan who had absolutely zero exposure to any of these issues, had no idea. His parents probably shielded him completely from anything, even suggesting that such things were possible. And I think in that context, his reactions are, I don't want to say understandable because he is a bully, but they're certainly not surprising. And I think he's important because uh, he's a connection of Shuu with the larger world, trying to understand who Shuu is. And I think that's what happens over the course of the series is Shinpei comes to understand who Shuu is. And you would never think that was possible at the beginning. But I think he is also important because he's kind of an indication of what a remarkable person Nitorine really is, because it was the force of Nitorine's personality. It was their kindness and their patience and their resilience. I think that all slowly kind of wore down Doi's prejudices, and eventually he came to see a person and not a category. And I think that's why his perspective is so important. And I think that's why I think it's in many ways, it's one of the most beautiful things that comes out of the series is seeing Doi develop from this person who sees their own, what they project and what their preconceptions are and what just seems strange. And over the course of time, through coming to know an individual, begins to see the individual rather than the category, rather than the stereotype, rather than the preconception. And I think that's a very powerful character arc, and I really love it. So that's my thinking on it.
No, great. I'm glad that we agree so much. I think his outsider's perspective is really important, and the fact that, like you say, his arc is done so well complements the much deeper exploration that we get from characters like Shuu or Yoshino.
Yep.
So anytime he
Yep.
was in the series, and I think him being around during the high school portion was also really, I think, important and really
Yeah.
well done. I liked his inclusion there so much, even though I would say maybe I think people would generally agree maybe that's the quote unquote the worst of the three arcs in the series, if you will. Um, but yeah, still great stuff happening there. Nice. I'm glad that we actually agree on that. For touching on that, on the high school stuff, Shu does go to a all boys high school. Am I right in think, or I'm curious on your thoughts on that, but also I believe you touch on it in your coverage when you did go over the anime and the manga. When you at that part of the series particularly as well, you have this exploration of puberty that Shu is going
Mm,
through.
mm.
Um, well, I think maybe you have more thoughts than me, especially on attending a boys' school. What's your thoughts on that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure really, but I'm not sure what Shimura was really, what statement she's making by having him decide to go to an all boys school. I do think that's very interesting. When you think about it, step back and look at the situation purely from a logical perspective.
Hmm.
Um, if you're a transgendered boy who wants to be a girl, why choose to go to an all boys high school? What's the thinking there? What's the logic there? Um, and I think one could give a lot of answers to that. And I think what I would say is I think Shimura is intentionally vague about that. I don't think she ever really spells out for us why Nitorin decided to go to an all boys school. I think that she leaves us to make that decision for ourselves. And I think in a way, I kind of come out of it feeling like Nitorin wanted to understand this part of themselves that was always kind of foreign, like
Mm,
Nichiren wanted to be a girl, right? And but of course the world expected Nichiren to be a boy. And I think he felt at that point in his life when he was she was 14 or whatever age when taking the high school entrance exams and the whole thing.
yeah.
I think I think I think there was a feeling there of I want to understand this side of me that I don't understand yet. I understand what it means if I'm going to walk away from it, if I'm going to choose another path. I think it's important for me to have a better understanding of this part of me that comes naturally to some other people, but to me is something I don't understand, is foreign to me. I wonder if there's an element of curiosity and exploration and wanting to know themselves better in that. At least that was my interpretation of it. But I don't think it's ever spelled out in detail why that decision, which is seemingly an odd decision, was made.
Yeah, I feel like Takako Shimura made that decision because she could make the most out of that situation dramatically, for the characters. I think as an author, that seems to be the intention for me reading it. I think what you
Mm,
explain as the in character reasoning also does make sense. And to go off of that, it could you could almost see it like, especially in that arc of the series, that's where Shuu becomes most confident in um, representing herself as a girl and embodying that and understanding it more. Perhaps there was that need for Sure to fully try and at least perform or live in um,
mm,
the way of a quote unquote boy in order to confirm for herself that that's not what was going to be the final outcome um, that she was
mm.
going to reach. I think
I
that,
think that's a
yeah,
very valid interpretation at the very least.
yeah, I think, yeah, that's maybe that's my takeaway from it. Um, Going off of that, did mention there are people who have different reactions to the series. So we both watched it and read it as it came out, and
Mm,
we definitely fall in the camp of we love the series for what it's done and how we feel about it. In preparing for this, and obviously throughout the years as well, just being familiar with the series, I've seen different takes from people who I think there are people who come at the series wanting to really enjoy it, because they want to feel represented or to see this sort of
mm,
story being explored. Because in the grand scheme of things, these sorts of queer focused LGBT stories done seriously are rare. They are there, and I think there's a lot of other
mm.
recommendations you can give off the back of this. But I think they latch on to Hourou Musuko, The Wandering Son, looking for a specific type of series. I think I touched on it in the beginning. It doesn't, because there is such a softness in its presentation and the artwork. I think it offsets going super super heavy and detailed into the transgender experience in the way
Right.
that people might want if they read it today, and they might expect
Mm,
if they read it today, because they want a full complete story. I don't want to say they want a manual of how you go from A to Z, but this is a type of story exploring that idea, and I think it's the one that Takako Shimura wanted. I get when people don't feel satisfied, or some people even feel offended. I saw people say that some elements of it are transphobic. I would not go that far. I think
no,
no, the sheer fact that it exists, and the way that the
that's
um
preposterous. It's
yeah,
preposterous.
the way that
It's
Shu is handled
preposterous.
and presented as a character, I just don't agree with that
Yeah,
sentiment
yeah,
at all. I think people, it's a hard thing depicting these very real issues in fiction.
yeah.
I would just say to people who maybe project too much on to this, and this is from someone who projected onto Doi, something which related to me specifically. I felt I
Right.
saw in Doi as a character that wasn't necessarily explored to that level in the end, but I was okay with that because I think what we got was still super super satisfying. I think
Mm,
people need to embrace the messiness of fiction when you're exploring these very real issues. And if you want, if what people do want is a super realistic take on being transgender, I'm sorry to say there would have been some elements of um, suicide. There would have been some elements of very, very dark thoughts in that journey that is so common, I feel like, for people who go through that. If you
Right.
want that quote unquote authentic experience, that is what you would get. And I also feel that those people don't necessarily want that. They want
Right. Right.
an affirming positive message to be put out. And it's just complicated. I think it's hard to get
I,
everything to please everyone. And yeah, that's my
when
ramble of
you
it.
yeah, when you're writing a series like Kimetsu no Yaiba, it's kind of easy to please everybody because you're really not setting high expectations in thematically. It's pretty very straightforward. When you're doing what Shimura did with this series, you're never going to please everybody. That's a given. But I have thoughts on this, if I may.
Go.
So, first of all, the high school arc contains my favorite chapter and my favorite scene in the entire manga, and it might be again like you or I choosing Doi as our one of our favorite side character might be a surprise to me. I would say this is a surprising scene, but it's a scene where Doi is in his second year at the school. Doi, excuse me. Well, Doi is too actually. Now that I think about it, but we were talking about Doi so much. But Nitorin is in their second year at the school, and it's the sports festival, the Undokai, and there's all kinds of weird shit going on as you would expect boys to do it in all boys school. And there's some very funny moments in that scene too, like where Mako is looking at what the third years are doing and says, I might just have to be sick for my entire third year. But my favorite scene in the entire manga is of all people, Nitorin's mom, who is a relatively minor figure for most of the story, who goes to attend the sports festival and watches Nitorin out there with all these burly young men who are taller than her, and thinks about everything she's been through with Nitorin and everything she's been through, and and the struggles of identity, and then just growing up, and she's overcome by the moment of just seeing uh, what this little child that she watched grow up, who this person is now, basically, an adult, and going off in a direction that is out of her orbit, out of her hands, and she's overcome with emotion. And Nichiren's little sister is like, Mom, why are you crying? What the hell is going on? And I totally got it. And the reason I totally got it, even though I don't have any kids myself, is because it's such a universal emotional thing, this whole idea of parent-child love and the fragility of that. And this ties into, I mean, I hate to quote myself, but when I did way back in 2013, when I did my series review post on the manga, my final post on it, what I said was, to paraphrase myself, is that the real magic of Hourou Musuko is that it creates a story about totally unique kids that are dealing with very specific and very particular problems that only people in their situation have to deal with, and yet it feels totally universal. And the strength of the series is less to me in the specifics of the transgender stuff, and although that's very important, but what it is more than anything else is a coming of age story, and the deepest emotional effectiveness of it is when it just deals with what the deals of puberty and adolescence, and all of it, not just the gender issues, but everything, and the whole idea of growing up, and identity. And identity is something that everyone struggles with growing up, and it's different with every person. But the point is, it's reductive to say I'm angry at Shimura because she didn't focus exclusively on making this a treatise, as you say, a comprehensive treatise, or I think even more for a lot of people, an advocacy piece uh, for transgender issues, and instead she opted to make it more of a universal story. Because I think what you're doing is you're reducing the people as individuals, you're reducing them to a category, and I think it's more. I think it's more when you view it from the big picture as just a story about people. They happen to be these specific people. They happen to be wrestling with the issues that they're wrestling with. And thank God we had a talented author like her talk about those issues, because it was vitally important that they get a hearing in a series that became as popular as this one did, and is as well written as this one is. But in the end, what makes it a great series is the universality of it, the way it looks at the experience of growing up, and whether you be Nitarine, whether you be Yoshino, whether you be Doi, whoever it is, it's about all of them. It's about all of their experiences, and it's about the things that tie us together. As much as the things that make us all different from each other, it's about the things that make us all the same. And as cliched as it is, I think that's the fucking point as far as I'm concerned. And that's the biggest issue I have with people going after her for not getting what they want out of this story in terms of politically or in any other way. She doesn't owe you that. That's not her responsibility. That's not her job. You're not entitled to that. It's her story. It's her story. They're her characters. Once it's written, they belong to everyone, and they belong to you. But while she's writing it, they belong to her. And that's her choice. And to me, you can be offended by whatever you want to be offended by, but I think it's pretty misguided to be offended by her not meeting your expectations in that specific way. That's just my opinion on it.
I think that's very well put.
And I feel pretty fucking strongly about it, I can tell you.
I can tell. Not every story can be everything, and not everything is expected to be relatable or enjoyable to everyone. If you feel like you didn't get the full experience out of the series, then that's fine. I think that's valid. You can feel that as a reader. But like you say, I would not project that onto Takako Shimura. She is one of the few authors who is exploring these themes. LGBT themes, it's themes about what it means like to be a girl, to be a boy, to be growing up, having puberty. Like, as I say, you can read the rest of her bibliography and you can feel her touch and everything. And the fact that she's telling these type of stories, I think, is it's a great thing in of itself.
Yeah, thank goodness she is. Thank goodness she is.
Yeah. And it's important to know the characters within the story, they don't have the knowledge or the verbiage or the understanding of themselves in the way that especially a modern audience of today would read the series knowing. Like, maybe you don't get the scene with Shuu having a big standout moment, telling the reader, telling the world everything that you want Shuu to have, like to say. But I just don't think it would feel true to what was presented throughout the whole series. I feel like it's valid if you have your concerns, but there is also a line where I feel it's just this is not an enemy telling this story. Just know that.
No. Don't look for enemies where there are only friends. There are plenty of real enemies out there you need to keep your eyes on.
And exactly. And like we say, we're not even considering these people in the conversation because I don't really value their voice on this particular series when it comes to that.
I have to agree.
On the series, on the ending then, let's discuss Yoshino very briefly. Blue Flag, I think, does a similar thing with Masumi, who is presented as a lesbian throughout majority of the series. Yoshino is presented as a transgender boy throughout most of the series. But as becomes clear in the latter half, Yoshino begins to have a change of mindset, and the story then becomes less about being a transgender boy and understanding that sort of change in opinion on the gender identity journey. I think people have an issue with that, maybe because it plays into this trope of a Japanese specific trope of transgender boys are just girls who will grow out of the phase. I get that feeling. I also see that with Masumi, and the lesbians will just grow out of it. They'll find a man and they will become a straight woman. I think that is sort of an idea and a trope that it exists. It does happen. I think that can be true, while also it is true that I think there's value in Yoshino's story being explored. That guess what? I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to change your mind on a gender identity journey. Detransitioning. This isn't detransitioning. It's not to that level.
No, no.
But that is also a valid story to tell, and
Mm.
um, you can be disheartened that, especially if you saw yourself in Yoshino, that you didn't get to see that to completion. I think that's fair. That's fine. But I also, like I say, there's value in that story also being explored.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm fine with it. I do understand that there's a sensitivity because, as you say, this may be a bit of a trope, and it's unfortunate that because it is a bit of a trope, any example of it is going to get painted with that brush. But I do understand that. But honestly, my only issue really with Yoshino's arc was that Yoshino was not a bigger part of the third act, and Yoshino is they're a fairly small part. Once the story goes to high school, because Yoshino is not at that high school, just not a huge important part of it, and kind of looped back in at the end to some extent, but over the course of the last third of the manga, not as big a part of the story. And I love the character. I mean, I love Yoshino, so I did want to see more Yoshino in the final part of the story. But as far as the actual resolution and the changing of the mind and all that, honestly, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I mean, I understand why people are upset by it, but I also think it's completely valid. I think that is a legitimate experience that people have, and I think it's completely valid to document one person going through that journey. It happens, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel the ending is conclusive enough? Does it wrap up everything in a satisfying way? We haven't even touched on another character who's very porting in the high school portion, which is Anna,
Mm,
Shu's girlfriend that we see
right.
during that section of the story. And she also has, she's a side character, but she has this journey of accepting Shu's transition to being a girl,
Yeah.
understanding and seeing Shu as a girl. And even in that final chapter, we have that line from her, which I love, which is, "Does this
Yeah.
mean I'll be a
Yeah.
lesbian?" Which
Yeah.
is,
It is a
yeah,
great line. It's a great line.
I, yeah, I love that moment. I actually really enjoy her character. It's almost like you say, Yoshino kind of, I don't want to say got abandoned, but she was once the storyline
Sidelined.
changed, sidelined. Whereas Anna came in, and
Yeah.
as someone who enjoyed Anna, that was
Yeah.
okay for me. That didn't affect my experience. But I think personally, I really like the ending for sure. I like the final page in particular as well. The declaration is like a full stop that I am a girl, and it encapsulates everything of Shu's journey up until that point. And how it frames it as telling a story which you could almost see on a meta level as well. What were your feelings on the ending as a whole then?
Well, I also like the fact that we see throughout the series that that Nitorin is interested in being a writer, in expressing themselves through writing. And as someone who does write, I like seeing that celebrated. Even I think wasn't there a school play situation where Shu wrote a school play, and everyone was kind of like, "Wow, this is really good."
Yeah, I
So
think so. Yeah.
I like seeing the ending framed through expression. That which is really what it come down to is finding their voice and expressing it. And I think that was kind of really liberating and validating. I'm glad we didn't get a 20 years later flash forward or something. I think it's better to kind of leave that in the imagination. I was perfectly fine with that. I think what you get out of the ending is Shu saying, "I'm very comfortable with who I am," and I think that's where the whole story was building up to. I didn't need any more than that. That was enough of an ending for me. Is that realization, and I think once we get there, once it's clear that that's where the character is, I think anything else is just secondary to that at that point. So I'm fine with it.
I also feel like if you, as long as you can embrace and understand that the series plays into the slice of life, soft casualness,
Mm,
that
mm.
if you were expecting some grand final chapter, personally, I think you were looking for something different than what the series was ever going to offer. What we got was perfectly appropriate, I feel, for what the
Yep.
series sold itself as. And with that, I think we're good in our discussion. You can tell we both love it. We're passionate for it. Enzo, if people want to if you want to recommend something similar to Hourou Musuko
Yeah.
Wandering Son, what would you say?
That's a tough one. It really is a tough one. I really ground on this, and honestly, I will give a manga recommendation because I know that's what we do. But the first thing I wanted to recommend was Tsuki ga Kirei by Kakihara Yuuko, which is actually an anime, but um, it's it's about um, adolescence and love, and I love it because it tells that story in a supremely sensitive and understanding way, which I really like. So for me, Suki ga Kirei is just a wonderful. It's just a wonderful story about adolescence and love and puberty and all of that. So that's my pick. But if I'm going to choose a manga, I chose Usagi Drop by Unita Yumi. And let me just say, going in,
That's a complicated
I
one.
know it's complicated, and if you want to get in endings, boy, that's an ending. And yes, I know about the ending, and yes, I have problems with it too. But it doesn't invalidate the whole series for me. The vast majority of which I think is pretty wonderful. And I think it has a very similar sort of a vibe to it, a very similar sort of feel to it, kind of like big events in people's lives cast in a slice of life context, and really, really deep and profound looks at characters, which I think is very important. And so, even though I do totally get why people are turned off by the ending, it's no mystery to me. I still recommend Usagi Drop by Unita Yumi. That's my manga pick. But I would also say if you haven't watched Tsuki ga Kirei, it's a 12 episode anime and it's absolutely a wondrous story about growing up and love. And I would highly recommend that too.
Nice. Um, my recommendation is going to be Our Dreams at Dusk, Shinanami Tasogare by Yuki Kamatani. And I have already recommended a series by them, Hireth, The Journey of the End. They're ex-gender, non-binary author who, in both of those series, but especially in Our Dreams at Dusk, explores queer themes through a teenager that is going through troubles at school, who finds this club, this group of people with other queer identities, and it's only 4 volumes, but it touches on so much during that time, and similar to what Takako Shimura does in across all of her series, and um, let's say tackling each letter of the LGBT alphabet in all the different ways that she feels like it. I feel like Our Dreams at Dusk does that and even more in just 4 volumes in one series. I think it is highly regarded, particularly I think among young queer people who resonate with that series a lot. And after that, let's do our scores, which I don't think will be too different from each other. Why don't you go first, Enzo?
Oh, this is a tough one. 94. And it's kind of 94 is that number, like I said, right outside my all time top 10 number. It would be 94. And kind of in the same ballpark as Pun Pun, right in that same range. That's where I am with Hourou Musuko, 94.
And I'm exactly the same, 94, and it's
Wow.
just outside my top 10. We don't tell each other the numbers now
Nope.
before we go in. We leave it as a surprise for both of us. So, yeah, I don't think we could agree more on any series from what we've covered so
No,
far.
we haven't agreed on Doi, so go figure. I think we went through a whole hour here. I don't think we disagreed once, right up until the final score, which
I
is
know.
that's got to be a first.
Okay, we'll have to make up for it in the next episode then. We'll manage.
We'll find a way.
But anyway, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that we've delved into with the series that we clearly both have a lot of passion for. Thank you, Enzo, for
Thank
taking
you.
part, and look forward to the next discussion to everyone. Bye bye.